Hello and welcome. The perceived relationship between Islam and the West has now become almost cliché, with phrases such as clash of civilizations regularly used. But what is the reality? What do those across the Muslim world think of the West, particularly America, and how do those in the American heartland receive practicing Muslims when they turn up at their doorstep? A renowned Pakistani Muslim scholar living in America decided to take a closer look and organized a massive field trip of sorts for his students. It involved visiting 8 countries in the Muslim world to observe, listen, and answer questions about America as well. A subsequent journey into the American heartland was then undertaken to provide the mirror perspective. The initial project led to a book, Journey into Islam, The Crisis of Globalization. And we'll speak with the students who took the trip to see what struck them most about their travels. But first we caught up with their professor, Akbar Ahmed, who created the project. On the campus of American University, we met him where he teaches Islamic studies. I started out by asking him why he feels it's so important for Western and Muslim people to understand more about each other.
I was hoping to travel to the Muslim world, and we went to the Middle East, South Asia, Far East Asia. I was hoping to understand the mood of the Muslim world and hear firsthand what Muslims were thinking about some of the key problems. What was their greatest sense of frustration or anger? What did they think of America? What did they think were the solutions to the problems? And taking these students as part of this project meant that American youngsters were face to face with some of the populations that with normally they would not come into contact.
How did you pick the students? How did you determine the profile of those who'd go out there to engage with the Muslim world?
I was very lucky. I had 2 honors students. These are the best on campus, very interested in Islam. Then I had my assistant working with me in my office. So these are incredibly committed young Americans wanting to learn about the Muslim world, and their heart was in trying to create bridges between America and the Muslim world.
And then the interesting part is how you discovered there's the other side to the process. It's not a one-way street, is it?
It isn't, because I wrote this book, Journey into Islam, looking at the Muslim world. And again and again, the tracks would lead back to America. How does America look at the Muslim world? Are they really understanding Islam? What is the feeling of Midwest America about Islam, and so on? And no Muslim anthropologist had ever done this kind of study, which is to go to mosque after mosque after mosque, travel throughout the United States. This is what we did, and I went to, in the end, 70 mosques. I visited 100 mosques in 70 cities over a period of about 8 to 9 months.
And of course there was Middle East, South Asia and Southeast Asia, a very diverse range of the Muslim world. What was the feedback from the students on what they discovered about the diversity of Islam?
They discovered the immense diversity, because in America, of course, Islam is seen as a monolith. Very often it's equated to the Arab world. Now, the Arab world is a very important part of Islam. Without the Arab language and the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, we have no Islam. At the same time, it is only 18% of the Muslim world. So the diversity of Islam, and I think what we discovered on both trips was the great sense of vibrancy, the vitality in the Muslim world, the sense of hope that there is enough feeling on both sides to create bridges between them.
So in contrast, when you got students to go around Middle America and sort of more remote parts of America, how is the contrast in the way Americans perceived Islam?
I think that there's an imminent clash between Muslims and non-Muslims in America. You know, there are books called the terrorists next door, and every Muslim is basically a terrorist. And once we were in the field, we found people who were very warm and open, and they're welcoming, and we went to mosques and synagogues and churches as Muslims. I was very often asked to give the khutbah at mosques. I was very often asked to stay with people, Muslim homes, with my team staying with me, and you know, these people would participate in the iftar or the sehri during the month of fasting, watch us saying prayers, and really begin to create an understanding of Muslims.
What's the solution then? How can this bridge between the perception and the reality be bridged, both on the Muslim world side, looking at the US, for example, and in America, understanding that Muslims aren't the enemy?
This is a question, Riz, which the government is now asking, because President Obama has actually taken the initiative to reach out to the Muslim world. He's reaching out and using words like respect and understanding and extending a hand of friendship. So this becomes a critical question, not just a theoretical question, a very practical question. I believe the first step is exactly what we did, which was to travel, to visit people's homes, visit people's places of worship, read about them, pick up a book, pick up an article, talk about what is the misunderstanding, and talk about what is common. We know many of the problems we have between the West and Islam, but there are also so many things in common. And ultimately, we do share the planet, we do share so many common things in terms of our Abrahamic religions. These things can be built upon.
So it'll be interesting. You basically will try and bridge the two sides that you've seen in separate.
Riz, I'm an anthropologist. The method that we used was simple. The method was let Americans speak themselves. We were on a voyage, a journey to listen, to learn. So when we sat down with Muslims, we asked them their stories. They were able to talk to us in confidence, in their homes, in their mosques, in confidence, so that they're talking and they're aware that my aim would be to reflect what they were thinking. Because very often they complained that people just didn't hear them, that very often people misrepresented them. Their stories were distorted and twisted, and that increased the chasm. Don't forget that all polls confirm that the misunderstandings between Americans and the Muslim world have not decreased. They've increased since 9/11. So it is a challenge. It's a challenge, I believe, for all people who are interested in creating better understanding between the two sides.
Well, that was Professor Akbar Ahmed, Chair of the Islamic Studies Department at American University in Washington, D.C. Well, now we'll speak with 4 of the students who made that journey to the Muslim world and then returned to America to study the perception of Muslims there as well. So Haley, Craig, Frankie and Jonathan, welcome to the show. Jonathan, if I can start with you and ask what you found different about this study. What made this study of the Muslim and Western world different from others that have been done?
Thank you, Riz, for having us. This project is really unprecedented. What we've done is travel across the whole of America, 70 cities, 100 mosques, and gotten to visit people in their own homes, in mosques. People have welcomed us in, and we're really having a one-on-one conversation for sometimes hours, really getting to know their thoughts on all the issues. And it's a little bit different from some of the phone surveys where people do, and it's very impersonal. You're not getting much information. While they're useful in some areas, this is really unprecedented in that we're
much more
taking 8 months to do this, yes.
Well, Craig, from what you saw in traveling around America, you went through so many places, you met people from so many different backgrounds. How did it change the way you view Muslims, for example, and also how Americans view Muslims?
I believe that after traveling across America, some of the best Americans are Muslims. They're active in politics. They have very strong businesses. They have PhDs. They have law degrees. There are a lot of doctors. So for me personally, I see Muslims as I see other Americans. There is no difference. They're Americans and they're good citizens.
Now, Haley, you went right across the board. You've been pretty much everywhere. And you saw so many aspects of the Muslim world, certainly far, far more than people in America would normally be exposed to, literally from those in Indonesia to those in the Arab world. What did it tell you about the diversity of Muslims?
Well, it's of course very diverse. We went to the Arab world, South Asia, and Far East Asia. And I think a lot of Americans see the Muslims as simply Arabs. You know, for us, it's almost interchangeable. So that really opened my eyes to the diversity and also the different cultural influences that all of these different cultures have. Like the Hindus have really mixed with Muslims in South Asia, and Christians and Jews have mixed with Muslims in the Arab world. So I think that's an important lesson for us to learn here as well in America.
Was there a common theme across the Muslim world that you found, though?
There was. I found that everyone there was very religious, very spiritual, and very open and welcoming. Hospitality was absolutely across the board open to us there.
Frankie, you also had the privilege, because of the exposure you had through Professor Akbar Ahmed, to meet, for example, in Pakistan, those at the top of the food chain, those running the country, the president, the prime minister, and so on, right down to the average person in the street. What did that tell you about the kind of people? What did the kind of people you meet tell you about the way Islam is treated through the layers of society?
Well, this was really, as Jonathan said, an unprecedented experience. We traveled through the length and the breadth of the Muslim world, and it started in class with Professor Ahmed, and we were able to meet people and listen to them. And when we were there, we were actually students. We started as students, but we were also anthropologists. We're trained by Professor Ahmed, who is an eminent anthropologist himself. So in the anthropological method, you meet with people, you sit there, you listen to them, you take notes. And so when we entered a situation, sometimes there'd be some tension in the air. People weren't sure where we were from, what we were doing there. But after we sat there and listened to people, things began to improve, the tension went down, And one of the questions we asked as we traveled through was, what is the biggest threat to the Muslim world? And the answer in every country was the same. And the #1 threat was perceptions of Islam in the United States. So we were expecting more political things, but this idea that Americans don't understand Muslims, or that there's a need for greater understanding. So we took this message back to the US, and this is what we're trying to do in America as well, improve relations between the Islamic world in the West and Muslims and non-Muslims in America.
Now, it was not only you asking questions, but they were asking you. And Jonathan, what did you find people wanted to ask you about America and your perceptions, apart from the young ladies in Indonesia with in hijab wanting to marry you?
Yeah. Well, there was, that's actually a pretty interesting story, not from that angle, but from another. The stereotypes that we have, and people think that Muslim women are, going to not look at you, not talk to you, and be very, not approach you in any way. But I found it very different. People would come up, and at one time I was surrounded by this horde of young women, and they were very respectful and polite, wearing the hijab, very religious, but they were aggressive in the way that they were asking me questions. What are you doing here? What do you want to learn from us? And so it was very interesting. They were asked sometimes about policy and U.S. foreign policy, but again, as Frankie said, the more we listened, the more we realized that they just wanted to be heard. So.
And also, they would also ask us about whether mosques are in the United States. They would say, are there Muslims in the United States? Are there mosques there? And after our trip, we found that there are over 7 million. We went to 100 mosques, and there's a huge range and vitality in the United States. And I think a lot of Muslims there don't realize how happy Muslims are in the United States. A lot of people told us it's the best place to practice Islam in the United States.
And we saw, for instance, in St. Louis, there are 60,000 Bosnian Muslims living in St. Louis. As an American in my own country, I didn't know that. There are 40,000 Nigerian Muslims living in Houston. We met people across the board. So this sense of diversity, that the whole Muslim world really is represented in the United States in a very strong, vital way.
Craig, did you get any suggestions from the people you met as you traveled around on what could be done to improve relations? Because many Muslims in America do feel threatened. They feel they are targeted, they are profiled. Was there any feedback on that?
Yes, there was. And the best way to improve relations is through education, through reaching out and through speaking to each other about cultures. A lot of Americans don't realize that Jesus is mentioned more times in the Quran than the Prophet Muhammad. These little things, just those little tidbits, can go a long way in bridging the gap.
I'm going to ask you to all stand by. We have more questions. We're going to take a very short break here. More of our discussion with our researchers who undertook the journey into Islam and the journey into America in just a moment. Don't go away.